Okay, so you want to own the Death Star, not command it. Anyone can command it. You stand on a walkway with your hands behind your back. Someone in a gray uniform tells you the rebels are attacking. You say, "How is that possible?" And then you die in an explosion visible from 3 star systems away. Done. No, you want to own it. You want to be the one holding the invoice for a 120-kilometer armored sphere, with a weapon on the front that deletes planets. And here is what makes this video different from every other one I've made. Every other fictional place I price, I have to estimate from scratch. Not this one. This one has an official government cost estimate. In 2012, a group of engineering students at Lehigh University worked out the steel cost. And in 2013, enough people petitioned the United States government to build one that the White House had to issue a formal written response, a real one, on the record. It cited a price, declined to proceed, and noted, I am quoting the spirit here, that the administration does not support blowing up planets, and that it was reluctant to spend that much on something with a fundamental flaw that lets a single one-man fighter destroy it. That is a real document. Your tax dollars produced a costed rejection of the Death Star. I have never been prouder of a government. Today, you're the owner. We're going to take that famous number, and then I'm going to show you why it is wrong. Not a little wrong. Wrong by a factor of thousands, and wrong in a direction nobody talks about. If you enjoy watching someone take a beloved film and drag it through a spreadsheet, subscribe. That's essentially the whole channel. And drop a comment with the fictional thing you'd bankrupt yourself to own. We're pricing all of them eventually. Quick housekeeping. Every figure here is either a published estimate, a real industry rate, or a physics number you can check. Where I'm guessing, I'll say so. And a note on the numbers themselves, we are going to leave normal money behind very early. I'll keep translating back into things you can actually feel. Right, let's start with what you're buying. The first Death Star is roughly 120 kilometers across. Hold that, because the human brain refuses to. The longest ship ever built was about 450 meters. The tallest building on Earth is about 830 meters. The International Space Station, the largest object humans have ever assembled in orbit, is about 109 meters end to end. This thing is 120,000 meters across. It is roughly 1,100 international space stations, laid nose to tail, arranged into a ball, and then armored. When the officer in the film says, "That's no moon," he is not being dramatic. He is being precise. It is moon-sized. And that matters economically, because the moment your structure is moon-sized, you are not in shipbuilding anymore. Shipbuilding has a supply chain. There is no supply chain for this. You are the supply chain, and you are going to have to invent it. And before we get anywhere near the famous price tag, I want to give you one number that made me put my pen down. The outer surface of a sphere that size is about 45,000 square kilometers of hull. That is not a figure of speech. That is roughly the land area of Denmark. You own an armored exterior the size of a European country, and it is exposed to vacuum, radiation, thermal cycling, and micrometeorite impact, continuously, forever. On Earth, we have a running joke about the Forth Bridge in Scotland, a structure so large that repainting it was said to be a job that never finishes, because by the time you reach one end, the other end needs doing again. That bridge is 2.5 kilometers long. Your hull is Denmark. There is no version of this where inspection and repair is a project with an end date. It is a permanent industrial activity employing a standing workforce whose entire career is walking the outside of a country-sized metal ball looking for holes. That is a cost line that exists in the real world for every ship and every bridge ever built. It is deeply boring, and on this project it never, ever stops. So, the famous number, the Lehigh students did the sensible thing. They took the steel-to-volume ratio of a modern aircraft carrier and scaled it up. They got about a quadrillion tons of steel, and a price of roughly $852 quadrillion. Let me put that in something human. World economic output, every country, everything produced, all of it, is somewhere around $100 trillion a year. $852 quadrillion is about 8,000 years of the entire planet's total output. Not profit, output. Every haircut, every phone, every loaf of bread, for 8,000 years, redirected into one object. The production time is worse. Global steel production is roughly 2 billion tons a year. To make a quadrillion tons at that rate takes something on the order of 800,000 years. Humans have had agriculture for about 12,000. You would need to start smelting in the Stone Age and finish sometime after the sun has meaningfully aged. And the students made a good point about the raw material. The iron is not the problem. Earth's core is mostly iron. There is enough there for a couple of billion of these. The metal exists. Getting at it, and getting it into space, is the entire ballgame. Which brings me to the part everyone gets wrong. That 852 quadrillion figure is a materials cost. It is what the steel costs. It does not include getting the steel off the planet. And this is the single biggest economic fact about the Death Star, so I want to be slow about it. Right now, putting mass into orbit is one of the most expensive things our species does. A commercial heavy lift launch runs on the order of $1,000 to $2,000 per kilogram. The most optimistic projections for fully reusable next-generation vehicles, and these are promotional numbers, not achieved ones, talk about getting down to something like $10 to $100 a kilogram eventually. Fine, let's be absurdly generous. Let's say you achieve $10 a kilogram, a figure nobody has ever demonstrated. A quadrillion tons is a billion kilograms. At $10 each, the freight bill is about $10 quintillion. 10 quintillion against 852 quadrillion for the metal. The shipping costs roughly 12 times more than the cargo, in the best case anyone has ever seriously proposed. At today's actual launch prices, the freight is well over 1,000 times the cost of the steel. So every article you have ever read about the price of the Death Star has priced the metal and ignored the postage. It is like carefully pricing a house by the timber and forgetting the land, the labor, and the country. There is only one way out of this, and it's the correct answer. You never launch anything. You build it in space, out of things already in space, which is a real industry that real people are working on right now, and the economics are fascinating. Asteroid mining. You may have seen the headline about the asteroid worth $10 quintillion, a metal-rich body that NASA has actually sent a mission to look at. And that number is a genuinely useful teaching moment, because it is nonsense. Not the mass is real, the price. That valuation multiplies the asteroid's metal by today's market price. And today's market price exists because metal is scarce. Deliver $1 quintillion of nickel and iron into a market that consumes a few billion tons a year, and the price does not stay put. It collapses. You have not created $10 quintillion of value. You have destroyed the metals market and then own a lot of very cheap rock. That is the thing to understand about your construction budget. At Death Star scale, you are not buying materials at market price. You are the market. You set it. And the first thing your project does is make its own primary input nearly worthless, which is either brilliant procurement or a macroeconomic crime, depending on your seat. But the mining infrastructure is not free. Our one real mission to visit a metal asteroid is to visit, just to orbit it and take readings, not to mine anything, not to return a gram, cost over $1 billion. Scale from look at one rock to industrially disassemble a quadrillion tons of rock and forge it in orbit. And you have a capital program larger than every industry that has ever existed, and it has to be finished before construction starts. Labor. Canon puts the operational crew somewhere around 1.7 million personnel, plus several 100,000 droids. That's the staffing to run it. Construction is a different and much larger number. There's no clean way to estimate this, so here's the honest version. The largest construction projects in human history employ a few 100,000 people over a decade or two. You need a workforce doing 800,000 years of steel production, in orbit, in vacuum, in radiation, with life support. Even with enormous automation, the human component alone would exceed the population of Earth many times over across the project's life. You cannot hire your way out of this. There are not enough people. The Death Star is not a project that a species of 8 billion can staff. It is a project for a civilization of trillions, which is exactly what the films depict, and it's one of the few places where the fiction is economically coherent. Now operating cost, because you pay this one forever. 1.7 million people living permanently in space. Every one of them needs air, water, food, heat, medical care, waste processing, and somewhere to sleep. Our real reference point is the International Space Station, roughly $150 billion to build, several billion a year to operate, for a crew of six. I'm not going to insult you by multiplying that by 280,000, because economies of scale are real, and that number would be meaningless. But scale the other way and it's still brutal. A nuclear aircraft carrier houses around 5,000 people, costs about $13 billion to build, and roughly $1 billion a year to run. It does that in an ocean, on a planet, with air outside and a supply port a week away. You need 340 carriers worth of crew, in vacuum, permanently, with no port. Call the annual operating cost hundreds of billions of dollars a year in Earth terms, and understand that number is almost certainly far too low, because every one of those carriers gets its oxygen for free and yours doesn't. There's a better way to think about this, actually, and it reframes the whole thing. 1.7 million people is not a crew, it's a city. That is the population of Vienna, or Warsaw, or Philadelphia. And you are not operating a weapon, you are operating a municipality that happens to have a gun attached. Cities have budgets, and they're public. A European city of that size runs on something in the order of $15 to $20 billion a year, and that pays for what you'd expect. Water, power, sanitation, transport, hospitals, housing, policing, administration. Now take that city and remove the two things every city on Earth gets for nothing. Remove the atmosphere, remove the ground. Your city has to manufacture its own air, indefinitely, with no margin for failure. It has to grow or import every calorie. It has to recycle every drop of water close to perfectly, because resupply is measured in light years. It needs hospitals, because a population that size has births, cancers, appendicitis, and heart attacks on a predictable schedule. It needs a detention system, we see it in the film. It needs waste processing, and yes, we see that too. And it's the only municipal utility in cinema history to become a plot point. So the operating cost isn't a military budget. It's a city budget with vacuum surcharges on every single line, and cities never stop spending. And then there's the fleet, which people forget entirely because it's parked inside. The station carries a very large complement of small fighters. Cannon puts it in the thousands. Let's use a real comparison. A modern 5th-generation fighter costs somewhere around $80 to $110 million before you fly it. Take 7,000 of them at $80 million, and the hangar contents alone come to roughly $560 billion. That is more than the annual defense budget of the United States, sitting in the garage, as an accessory. And aircraft are not a one-time purchase. The rule of thumb across real air forces is that operating and sustaining a combat aircraft over its life costs more than buying it. Pilots, training, spares, fuel, maintenance crews, hangar deck operations. Your parking is a superpower's military. It doesn't appear in the price of the station, and it should. And now my favorite line item in anything I have ever priced: the weapon. Not building the weapon, firing it. To blow a planet apart, not crack it, not scorch it, actually disassemble it against its own gravity, you have to beat its gravitational binding energy. For an Earth-sized planet, that is a specific, known, checkable physics number. And the cleanest way to express it is this. It is roughly the amount of energy the entire human species currently uses in 370 billion years. Not 370, not 370 million, 370 billion years, which is more than 25 times the current age of the universe, per shot. Let's put a dollar figure on it, because that's the channel. At an absurdly cheap electricity rate, 1 cent per kilowatt hour, well below the cheapest industrial power on Earth, one trigger pull costs on the order of $600 sextillion. That is roughly 700,000 times the total steel cost of the station. Read that again. Every single time you fire this thing, you spend several 100,000 Death Stars worth of energy. The station is not the expensive part. The station is the delivery mechanism for the expensive part. And in the film, they fire it twice. Nobody in that universe ever mentions this. There is no scene where an accountant faints. And while we're on energy, there's a cost here that I genuinely never thought about until I started writing this. And it might be the most expensive routine activity in the entire operation. It moves. This thing does not sit in one orbit. It travels between star systems. It arrives places. That means a sphere weighing on the order of a quadrillion tons is being accelerated, decelerated, and steered repeatedly as a matter of normal operations. Moving mass costs energy, and it scales with the mass, and the mass here is the problem. Getting an object that heavy up to any useful speed and then stopping it again requires energy in the same ludicrous class as the weapon. And unlike the weapon, you do it every time you go anywhere. The super laser fires twice in the story. The engines run constantly. On Earth, this is the most ordinary line item in transport. Fuel is the dominant operating cost of every ship, aircraft, and truck fleet in existence, and it's why shipping companies obsess over it, and why a modern container ship sails slower than it can to save it. Now apply that logic to a moving country. Every single journey this station makes is an energy expenditure that would power a civilization. There is no scene where anyone asks whether the trip was necessary, and in a real fleet, that question, is this voyage worth the fuel, is asked before every departure by someone whose whole job is asking it. Now the design flaw, and I want to handle this differently from how it usually gets handled. Everyone jokes about the exhaust port. The interesting part isn't the port, it's how the enemy knew about it. They had the plans. The technical readouts were stolen by insiders from a secure archive and handed to the opposition. And that is the most realistic thing in the entire story, because it is the defining risk of every large defense program that has ever run. When your project employs a civilization, your workforce is your attack surface. Every contractor, every subcontractor, every clerk with archive access is a potential leak. And the bigger the program, the more of them there are, and the less you can vet any of them. Real defense industries spend enormous sums on exactly this: document control, compartmentalization, clearance vetting, need-to-know architecture. It is a permanent overhead with no visible output. It is deeply unglamorous, and it is the thing that actually killed this station. Not the port, the filing cabinet. The port is a 2-meter opening on a 120-kilometer sphere. In engineering terms, that is a tolerance of about 1 part in 60 million. You did not fail at engineering. You failed at information security, which is cheaper to fix and much easier to ignore. And then, remarkably, you do the whole thing again. They build a second one, larger, and it is destroyed while still under construction, which in accounting terms is its own special flavor of pain, because you don't just lose a finished asset, you lose work in progress, every hour of labor and every ton of material already committed, with nothing to show, and no salvage, because the salvage was also destroyed. 2 total write-offs of the largest capital object in the history of the galaxy, inside a handful of years. There is no insurer for this. There is no reserve fund for this. There is no financing structure in existence that survives this, because the entire enterprise has a demonstrated 100% loss rate across 2 attempts. So what does it cost? Materials, at the famous published estimate, $852 quadrillion, about 8,000 years of total human economic output. Getting it to orbit, if you were foolish enough to launch it, 10 quintillion, at the most optimistic rate ever proposed, more than 1,000 times worse at real ones. The orbital mining and manufacturing program you need instead, unpriceable and larger than all industry that has ever existed. Operating cost, hundreds of billions a year, forever, and that's charitable. And each shot, $600 sextillion, which makes the station itself a rounding error on its own ammunition. And here is where I want to leave you, because it took me a long time to see it and now I can't unsee it. The Death Star is a weapon whose purpose is to enforce order through fear. That's stated outright in the film. Fear of this battle station keeps the systems in line. It is a compliance tool. It exists to make people pay their taxes and follow the rules. And its only function is to permanently delete the people who pay taxes and follow the rules. Every time you fire it, you destroy a planet. That planet had a population, an economy, industry, trade, and a tax base. You have just removed all of it from your own balance sheet, forever, at a cost of $600 sextillion, in order to encourage everyone else to keep paying. You have built, at a price of 8,000 years of galactic output, a machine that converts enormous expense directly into a smaller economy. It is an asset that destroys revenue. Every use makes you poorer twice, once for the energy and once for the customers. And the alternative was sitting right there the whole time. For a fraction of what this cost, you could have simply addressed the grievances, not out of kindness, out of arithmetic. Every rebellion in that galaxy could have been bought off, funded, subsidized, and pensioned for less than the electricity bill on one shot. Terror was not the ruthless option. Terror was the expensive option, chosen by people who never asked what it cost, and who then, having watched it fail completely, immediately built a bigger one. So yes, you can own the Death Star. It costs 8,000 years of your civilization's entire output. It can't be insured. It can't be financed. It can't be staffed by any species this size. Its ammunition costs more than the gun by a factor of 100,000. And it has never once been operated to completion without being destroyed by a small fighter flown by someone who had read the manual. Build the sphere if you must. Do not, under any circumstances, pull the trigger. If you made it this far, subscribe. We're pricing every impossible thing in fiction eventually. And tell me in the comments which one I should bankrupt myself on next.